So, why do people change drastically when their alcohol consumption is very high, when they drink abusively? Why does the character change so much? We've all been there. We do things we wouldn't dream of doing when we're sober, and the next day we're full of remorse and regret. We may have insulted our friends, got aggressive, insulted our family, and so on. And these are things that we would never ever do when we were sober. Why do people do that? Why do we hate the ones that we love when we drink abusively or when we drink excessively? To answer this question, we really need to look at psychology and the early work of Freud. And the mind is intangible. What that means basically is we can't see it. So what happens is that psychologists devise models that will help us understand what may be going on in the mind. Like I say, it's intangible. We can't access it with our physical senses. So to get an idea, they build these models. And Freud come up with a very interesting and simple one called Freud's tripart structural model. And what he said is that the mind is basically made up of three components. Who we are, if you like, is made up of three components. And the first one he talked about, which is the id. And that translates to it in English. And he said the id is that part of our mind that deals with our primary instincts, such as survival, procreating, aggression, defending ourselves, and sexual tendencies, all were to do with the id. It was, if you like, our animalistic nature. The id acted solely on what was called the pleasure principle. It will take the path of least resistance to pleasure, and it has no care about anybody else. It has no morals or ethics or rules. So I put this example in the book. If we were purely id, which perhaps, going back years ago before our conscience developed, we were the cavemen and whatever. If we were hungry and the id was in control of ourself, then if we were hungry and somebody was walking up the street with some chips or something, the id would say, I'm hungry, I need to satisfy this hunger now, the path of least resistance to pleasure. It would beat the person up and take the food off them. And obviously that's unacceptable in our society today. We can't do that. So Freud said, well, there must be something now that balances out, that marshals, if you like, this animalistic nature in us, the id. So he come up with this concept of the superego, or the above I, if you want to put it that way. And he said that basically that the superego is our internalized father figure, and it stipulates rules, regulations, ethics. Today we wouldn't say father figure. We make a more broad definition. We would say the internalized rules of society that stem from our parents initially. So we've got rules and morals and ethics and so on. And if you like, a much simpler way of putting this is that our superego is our conscience. We have a conscience, obviously, and whereas before the id would just steal off another person, the superego or conscience would intervene and tell us that's wrong and prohibit it. And in a structural model, in between these two opposing polarities of the id or the it and the superego, the above I, we've got the I, the central core of our being, which you call the ego. And you do often hear people say, we must get rid of ego, we must die to ego. People on spiritual paths often say, the ego must go. And no, the ego is a really important part of our fibre, of our psyche, if you like. It's just that people don't really understand what it is. And the ego is the central core of our psyche, like I said earlier on. And basically it's the arbitrator or the referee between the id and our instinctive nature, which is very important for our survival. It's not a bad thing. And our superego, or our conscience. So if you think about it, then let's go back to our other scenario. The id is walking down the street, it's in control of our psyche, sees somebody eating food, we're hungry. The id says, let's beat him up and let's take his food off him. The path of least resistance to pleasure. It acts on the pleasure principle. Conversely, the ego, or the core self, or the I, that works on the reality principle. And not only does the ego, or the I, the central I, referee between the opposing polarities of our id and our superego, but also it interfaces with the outside world. So our id says, let's beat him up, let's take the food off him, let's satisfy our hunger. The conscience jumps in, the superego, and says, no, that's not permissible in society now. If we did that, there'd be no civilization whatsoever. The ego, or the I, listens to both these arguments and says, well, yes, id, we are hungry, but we can't do it the way you want to do it. That's not permissible in our society today. The superego is right there, but we do need to satisfy this hunger, and it acts on the reality principle. So the ego might say, let's get our bank card, go to the nearest cash machine and buy some food at the shop. There's a compromise there. We're satisfying the needs of the id, the instinctual nature of our psyche, and we're also satisfying the morals and ethics of society that keeps civilization together in the superego, or conscience. And the ego is the central part of that, the fulcrum, the arbiter between the opposing polarities. Now, I suppose you're thinking, well, how does this all fit in with alcoholism? Well, it's very, very important. What happens when we drink alcohol? The consistency of alcohol is very much like water. And when we drink alcohol, it infiltrates what's known as the blood-brain barrier. So alcohol compromises the blood-brain barrier and goes straight to the frontal lobes of our brain. Alcohol, once we ingest it, it goes straight to the frontal lobes of our brain. Now, the frontal lobe of our brain, amongst other things, deals with our inhibitions. And what happens, quite frankly, is that when we drink, we become uninhibited. This simply means that we don't care. Okay, and when we've got problems going on, bear in mind, really, alcoholism is a mechanism of escape. That's what it is. People drink to escape problems, to relax, to become uninhibited. So when we've got problems and we take a drink, we've all been there, we've all done it, they seem to disappear. And then our mind gets seduced into thinking, oh, alcohol is the magical panacea for all life's problems. It makes them disappear. So next time we have a problem, we have another drink. And you know the story. This goes on and on and on, and we need more and more alcohol to dampen our problems. It takes more and more because we become habituated to its effects, which means that we need to ingest more and more alcohol. Right, it may mask our problems. It certainly doesn't get rid of our problems. It doesn't eradicate our problems. It simply masks them. All it does is shoves them down. Alcohol also affects our memory. It impairs our memory. So we not only become uninhibited, but we forget about our problems for a while. But not only does that happen, the other thing that we forget about when we take drink is our conscience. Basically, our conscience, or superego, is knocked out of action. Okay? So we've got no rules, ethics, morals, and so on. And we'll act primarily from the id, from our instinctual nature. Hence, when we drink, we can become aggressive, we can insult, we're uninhibited, we don't care, we have no conscience. Therefore, we act way out of character. And this is pure and simply through taking alcohol and the effects of alcohol on our brain. So what happens then is that we start to do things that are out of character. We may go into a blackout, we can't remember what's happening. And the next morning or whatever, we wake up and you know it. Oh my God, what have I done? Who did I insult last night? I remember throwing up in the chip shop. I remember being aggressive towards my beloved parents, and then you feel remorse and guilt. And as the alcohol wears off, you know what happens. All of these, the guilt, the anxiety, the fear, the remorse starts to come about. And what happens? You want to escape it. So what do? Your mind thinks, when it becomes habituated, it thinks alcohol is the magical panacea for this. It gets rid of all my problems. Well, that's an absolute fallacy, because it creates a lot more problems than it masks. And it does this because it knocks our conscience out of action. And this is why, for family and friends of people who are drinking out there, this is why your loved ones act way out of character when they consume alcohol, when they consume too much alcohol. I hope that answers the question. We know now that if we drink excessively, that we're going to act out of character. And using Freud's structural model, that's what happens. We not only mask our problems when we drink, and not only mask them temporarily, they're going to come back in force and tenfold. We knock out our conscience also. And when we knock out our conscience, we're like loose cannons. We're capable of doing anything because we're acting from our instinctual nature. Thank you. That ends this short video.